Welcome to the Ryerson Negotiation Project. My guest today is Chris Rudge, currently the Executive Chairperson of the Toronto Argonauts. He's the former Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Olympics, Chairperson of the 100th anniversary of the 2012 Grey Cup in Toronto, and a former corporate executive. Welcome to our show, Chris.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Chris, what kinds of preparation did you undertake to execute the 100th anniversary of the 2012 Grey Cup? And by all estimations, detractors and all, it was a huge, huge success.
Well, I think it was a great Toronto, Ontario, and Canadian experience, and we were very gratified with the result, for sure. The fact that the Argos won the game was the icing on the cake. You know, we could never have planned for that in our wildest dreams. But the festival itself, you know, we approached that, I think, like anything else you do in a business. You've got to say, well, where are we? And what is it that we want to accomplish here? And then let's start building the plan. In the case of the 100th Grey Cup Festival, it was a celebration here in Toronto of what is annually the largest cultural celebration that we arguably have in this country.
The Grey Cup.
The Grey Cup. You know, and I mean, everybody in this country at some point or other has probably had chili and beer in their basement, sat around with the family on a Sunday afternoon and watched the Grey Cup. Over half the country watches it on television, so it certainly has a profound impact, I think, on the Canadian mosaic. And so we knew that to do it justice, it had to be something special for the 100th, particularly here in Toronto, which is not your quintessential CFL city. It's the community is much bigger in Toronto, and to get it engaged was going to require a slightly different approach. So having done that, I think the first thing I did was listen. Talk to everybody that had been involved in running the Grey Cup in the past, the people that ran it here in Toronto in 2007. Spent a lot of time in BC, who were going to run it in the fall of 2011. Also the people in Edmonton that ran it in 2010, Calgary that ran it in 2009. Listen, pick their brains. What makes it work? What are the essential elements of this, and how can we take the things that really work well and make them work well in Toronto and add to it to create something that pays tribute to the fact that it is the 100th. Having done that, then it's a case of building the plan. You have to be able to, like anything that you lead in a business, articulate the vision and bring people on side. This is what we want to accomplish. And in this case, the vision really centered around making this something for all Canadians. So we had a phrase very early on we called an invitation to our nation. We wanted it to be beyond beer and football. It wasn't just about something for jocks or VIPs. We wanted the whole community to come down to the center of Toronto and say, boy, have you been down to Nathan Phillips Square or Yonge and Dundas Square and see what's going on there? Something for families, everybody. And then when we'd done that, we had to take it out to the people that could help us be successful. Said, you know, this is our vision. We need you to be part of this. And one of the things we did probably at least a year and a half out is I rented a movie theater, had 400 people come. We had over 80 media people there, every conceivable sponsor, the police, the fire departments, all of these staff at City Hall, the convention center people, everyone that could touch our project. And we said, this is our vision. We need your help. This is what it means to this city. Will you be part of this journey?
How early in the process did you have that kind of preparatory meeting in terms of consultations with the stakeholders?
We started the whole process 2 years out, but we really got the stakeholders together about a year and a half ahead, and then started going to them one at a time as we were building the plan.
So preparation was a formidable aspect of the execution of this great event.
It was a big part, and I think the listening to see what could and what wouldn't work was a big part of it. So yeah, preparation was huge. You don't see that, and that happens in a lot of major projects. It happens in a lot of business negotiations. It's like the iceberg, you know. There's 80% of it is below the water, or 90% of it's below the water. You see the tip, all the public stuff, but there's an awful lot that goes on to make sure that you get it right.
As you know, in negotiations, one aspect of a successful negotiations is the relationship with the other side. Now, you've had many, many different experiences in the corporate world in terms of negotiating collective agreements, negotiating particular sales, sponsorships and things of that nature. From your perspective and many experiences, tell us about relationships and trying to develop those in a positive way in order to achieve your particular objective.
Well, relationships are huge, not just in negotiations, but as you move through life. You establish relationships, and those relationships can come back to help you out, or they can be an impediment to success if you don't handle them the right way. But when you go into a negotiation, whether it be negotiating a deal, a business deal, or whether you're selling or trying to consummate something with government partners, etc., I think having an intimate understanding of who you're going to deal with at the personal level is important, because every personality will handle the issues in a different way. What are the issues? And I think really trying to understand, what does the other person want to get out of this? And then what do you want to get out of it? So you can approach the negotiation from the perspective of trying to create some kind of a win-win. I think too many people, I think, often go into a negotiation saying, you know, I've got to make sure that I come out the winner in this, instead of saying, what do I want to get out of it? If I get out of it what I need and the other person gets what they want, we will have a very successful partnership going forward. Because it's not just the negotiation and the deal itself. You've got to live with the deal afterwards, and that means living with the person you've been negotiating with. So understanding how that person thinks, what are the idiosyncrasies of their personality, who's the constituency that they're representing. It's the same as the example we gave a few minutes ago. Doing your preparation ahead of time is very, very important.
We're trying to understand the interests of the other side. Do you have any examples in terms of where you've sort of dug either deeply or exhaustively in terms of the other persons that you're dealing with to try to understand where they're coming from? Or is that just an aspect of the listening skill that one has to have to be an effective negotiator?
Well, I think there are lots of examples of those kinds of things, but I think it's a part of every deal you do. I mean, I can think of some of the better, more successful deals I had. Back to my Quebec or printing days, in the mid-90s, we created a telephone directory printing division. We were small players in that marketplace at the time, and it was a very lucrative business we wanted to get into, and the big player was a company called Donnelly. And we wanted to grow quickly, so essentially to do that, we couldn't rely on organic growth. We had to do it through acquisition. And I identified a small company in Loveland, Colorado that was actually owned by US West, which was the large directory publisher at the time. Their business was publishing, not printing. I knew that this business was not running well, and that they wanted to get out of the printing business. So we entered into negotiations with US West, and I dealt essentially with the president, and a big part of it was planning ahead of time and saying, okay, what's in it for him? Because I knew what I could get out of it. I knew we could rationalize this business, move some technology down there, make it much more efficient. What's in it for him? Well, he wanted to get rid of the business. He needed to cash out at a reasonable level, etc. And he needed a partner to work with going forward. And so we entered into a negotiation that was a real win-win, because we got back from them, bought the company at a reasonable price. We got rid of the real estate and leased back, etc., so we mitigated our cost going into the deal. The company had only been making on $20 million of sales, maybe $500,000 EBITDA at the time. But we got back from the deal contracts for a certain percentage of this company's business beyond what they were already printing there that we knew would fit well with that plant. And we knew the printing side better than they did. But what the icing on the cake was that really made it work for him. So we said, if we can get the EBITDA to a certain level, we will pay you a percentage of everything over that, up to, I think it was something like $1 million a year.
Wow.
And within 3 years, we had that company up to about $30 million in sale, but over $10 million of EBITDA. So tremendously successful. We knew what they wanted. They got rid of a business they didn't understand. They had a reliable supplier, and they were still getting now more cash back from the business than when they owned it.
So that's
it was
really
a real win-win.
A real win-win situation.
Yeah, we prepared well for it. So I think any negotiation you go into, preparing ahead of time, knowing what the other guy wants, and making sure that you come out with a win for both parties, to me is very important. Not everybody negotiates that way. Some people, they want to hammer the other guy and know that they walked away the winner. I've never found that to be a strategy that's worked well for me.
Tell me about your listening skills. Have you always been a superb listener, or was there trial and error?
Well, I think there was lots of trial and error. You know, when I was young, I mean, I was a teacher through the 70s and a professional athlete, et cetera, and then I got into the business world in the late 70s, early 80s, and I can remember well when I learned how important it was to listen on a sales call I made very early. I was working for the Financial Post newspaper selling advertising space. And I'd taken there used to be a thing called Professional Selling Skills 1 and 2. It was run by Xerox, who were the ultimate sales company. I actually used this story at a Xerox sales conference that I spoke to last week. And so I took this course on selling skills, and one of the first calls I went out to after taking the course was to a company called Olivetti, which was an Italian office equipment manufacturing company. I don't even know if they're in the business anymore. You don't hear the name. Anyway, I met with their advertising manager, and the objective of the call was to try and increase the amount of advertising lineage we were getting in the Financial Post. So I went through the whole process of everything I'd learned in this sales course. You know, I outlined our features, I translated them into benefits, I probed, I used open probes and closed probes, I took objections and clarified them, all the things that you're supposed to do, and I'm hammering away, and I felt so good about the call. I did it for about an hour, and I went back to the office, and the boss came in, and he said, "Chris, did you a sales call at Olivetti today?" I said, "Yeah, I did, Jim." I said, "It was fantastic. That course you sent me on, you know, he said this, I said that, went through the whole process. I think we're probably going to double the business." He says, "That's funny because their advertising agency called, and he'd call them and ask that you never show your face around there again." He says, "But I know you're out there doing something." So we walked through it, and he was a patient guy, and I hadn't been listening. I'd been hammering away with all these skills. It was all about what I was going to do, not about what he wanted. And so I learned a lesson very quickly there. But that was, you know, I had not yet at that time built the bridge from intelligence to wisdom. I don't know if I have yet, but I listen a lot better now.
Tell us, in your many different experiences, how did you deal with the egos? I mean, you've been in the sports world, you've been in the business world. Ego is quite predominant in those two factors.
Yeah,
how do you deal with ego? I guess it can be a plus, and in some ways it can be a negative.
Well, I think first of all, you've got to recognize that it's there. I guess if you had the option of saying, well, I'm going to choose not to deal with this person, you could probably walk away from it, but I don't think you find many circumstances where that applies. Egos are particularly huge in the sports world. When I was in the Olympic world, I don't think there are any bigger egos you'll ever meet in your life than those amongst the IOC members and International Sport Federation leaders, etc. It's the consummate manifestation of the intoxication of power. So the fact is they're there, and it's a reality that you have to deal with. And so I think you've got to take that reality and turn it into a benefit for you. And one of the best ways to do that is to flatter them. You know, somebody that has a big ego, says, "Oh my God, I've admired your work from afar for a long time." You know, because you know that person's in a position to help you or become an impediment or a detriment to what you want to accomplish. So you may not like it, but one of the best ways to deal with it is to flatter them. And you're a former politician, and some of the best politicians are those that just make everybody feel important. You know, nobody's better at that than David Peterson. You know, and I think you've had him on this show. Make everybody feel important. So if they have a big ego, that's fine. Don't let it get in the way of you accomplishing what you need to accomplish for the organization or the group that you represent, or for the process that you're going through. If that person can help you.
I think that's very instructive. You're in essence, you're saying is recognize it for what it is.
Sure.
And play it to your strength as opposed to your weakness.
Exactly. You're not going to change it. It's there. So turn it into a strength.
Very good. Very good. Tell us, as a CEO of the Olympics, if you could share with us in terms of how you developed that mandate to carry the organization forward. Because I think all of us recall that during your tenure as the CEO of the Canadian Olympic Movement, it was very successful as we led ourselves into the Olympics. Well, tell us about how you developed that mandate.
Yeah, I mean, everything you do is a team. I mean, you may have the top job, or you may be the more visible face of the organization, but it's really a collective group of people that come together to accomplish things. I think that one of the things I recognized early when I got to the Canadian Olympic Committee, the years that I went there, and that was 2003 I joined them, is that the organization was not particularly focused on the 3 or 4 things it could accomplish. It was trying to be all things to all people. And when you do that, you become a mile wide and an inch deep. You know, you don't do a good job at anything. And here's an example of a young executive I worked with recently who's very bright, very ambitious. And I took him out to Starbucks one day and I said, you know, I'll say Bill, is his name, it's a generic name. I said, one of the problems you've got is that you're trying to do 10 things. And if you do 8 out of 10 things well, or reasonably well, and you do 80% of 10 things, you'll be seen to be a failure. Pick 4 or 5 things and do them properly. You know, the Olympics was too broad and involved in too many things. The Olympic Committee wasn't focused on what really mattered to people, and what really mattered to people and to the athletes was success on the field of play. And so we brought the process down to focusing on what we could do to have an impact on the success of the athletes. And then that was kind of the genesis of starting to build the On the Podium program. It was really inspired by a colleague of mine named Mark Lowry, who subsequently died of cancer, unfortunately, before 2010. But one of the best friends young athletes ever had in this country. And one of the most profound things that was said to us that really got us focused on what we needed to do came out of the games in Athens in 2004, where the team didn't do well.
No, it didn't.
We only won 12 medals. It was perceived that we should have done better. We sat up on the podium, myself and 4 or 5 colleagues, and we went through a whole litany of excuses. The other guys have more money, we don't have the resources, we can't get the coaches, the government doesn't support us enough, and on and on. And during that process, one of the reporters there, Dave Perkins, who still writes occasionally for the Toronto Star, you know, he listened, and it was time for a question, and he put his hand up and he said, I've heard all that before, and all that's fine. He says, but Chris, he says, what are you going to do about it? You know, and I thought about that, and I turned to Mark when we went out of the room, and I said, you know, Mark, I'm never going to sit up there again and have a guy ask me that kind of question, because we have abdicated our responsibility to lead. We've made excuses for all of our failures. It's always somebody else's fault. The fact is, if we're going to get the support we need, we have to develop a plan that deserves the support. And the main support's got to come from our government partners. We can't just go to them hat in hand and say, give us money. Everybody's doing that. There has to be a return on investment. We have to have a plan that demonstrates that an investment in high-performance sport and success on the field of play will be a great experience for Canadians, a great way for the government to spend its money, and we'll have a payback in terms of the engagement of youth and the unifying the country and everything else.
So that was a specific document that you had prepared for government?
Well, that was the start of the thinking about how we create something that eventually led to On the Podium. And in that process, we then started to learn how to work with government much more effectively in terms of what would be, I guess, generically called lobbying for money. But I never called it lobbying. I called it trying to be an informed and engaged stakeholder. So deal with the bureaucrats, the political staff, the ministers with respect. They've got difficult decisions to make. What can we share with them that will allow them to appear to be responsible custodians of the public purse, and that will have a payoff for Canadians, and that will get us the resources that we need? So getting the organization focused on very clear goals, and there were others as well in terms of community engagement and education and raising money, but getting us focused on that goal was exceedingly important.
Take us back a few steps. When you say we can't do the 10 or 12 things that we've been doing, we've got to focus on something like 3 or 4 things. What kind of consultations and stakeholder engagements did you have in the preparation of, hey, this is what we're going to focus on in terms of our mandate going forward?
A lot, and that's a very good question, because the sport scene in this country is highly diverse. I mean, you have the Olympic Committee is engaged, you have Sport Canada, you have all of the provinces have their own sport groups, you have the national sport federations, who are the ones that really hire the coaches and train the athletes, etc. You've got to deal with the international federations. All kinds of constituencies are involved. So getting them all on the same page can be very, very different or difficult, and it has to become a highly collaborative process. And that, I think, means you've got to, again, prepare well, listen to everybody there, what is it that they need, and then be able to articulate a vision that demonstrates that by working together, the collective good is going to be much, much greater for the country and for the sport mosaic than if each one of them is working on their own. And that's essentially what we did. You know, Mark came up with a plan to do a lot of research on the strengths and weaknesses of our winter sport programs. We looked hard at the results in Salt Lake City as we were preparing for 2010. We knew we had to do well in 2010 on the field of play or the games wouldn't be seen to be successful in Canada. And he came back with an idea to hire a lady named Kathy Priestner to investigate all this. We had to then take it to the sport federations. Their initial reaction is, well, wait, we're the ones that build sport. You consolidate the athletes and take them to the games. And we said, listen, we're going to spend the money and do this anyway. I've raised the $150,000 it's going to cost. We'll give you the report. You can accept it or reject it, but we're going to do it.
What was the reaction to that report?
Well, to get there was the hard part. They said, okay, if you're going to do it anyway, maybe we should be part of it. So then we did the report, and we gave it to the sports and said, this is what we found. This is the cold, objective analysis. Take it away. You know, it essentially showed that we were not converting athletes from potential success as well as other countries in the world. In the intense moment of the Olympics, that we didn't have the depth of field we needed, that some sports were tremendously underperforming, others had great potential. We gave it to the sports, said, you guys take it away. So the reaction was they took it away, they studied it, they got together on their own. And they came back to us and said, all right, we see a lot here. We said, you tell us where you think we could finish in 2010 if we gave you all the resources you wanted, and how much do you need? The sports came back, and you know, Ken Reed was a big leader amongst them, you know, our famous skier and others. And they came back and said, if you got us $110 million over the next 5 years, we think we could be #1 in the world in medals. Now that's a very bold, un-Canadian statement, make at the time. I think we've changed our thinking now. I think the concept of Own the Podium has now become an audacious expression of our ability to stand up and say we're not afraid to try and be the best we can be. And that was one of the things that really has come out of that, and I think the greatest legacy out of Vancouver. But they came back collectively and said, we'll buy into this, because the whole approach showed that there was something in it for them.
So the mandate was then developed.
Exactly.
People knew where you were wanting to go.
Yeah, people, the objective was very clear. We're going to be, we think we can be at the top. That's what we're going to try and achieve. And this is the plan to get there. So we knew where we were. We knew where we wanted to go. We knew who was responsible for doing what. We knew what obstacles we had to get out of the way, what resources we had to bring to the table, how were we going to measure it, what were the litmus tests on the way through. I mean, we started this at around 2003 or 4. The next litmus test was going to be the Winter Games in Torino. So we set goals and objectives there, and we met them. And we looked at all the World Cup results and the World Championship results every year. We kept moving up. So we strengthened the program on the way through all the time. We knew we were onto something. And a big part of it that was, I think, unique, where people often don't get credit who should, were some of the sports who got nothing. Because out of this, we recognized we weren't going to win any medals in biathlon. We weren't going to win anything in ski jumping. We weren't going to win anything in Nordic combined. And those sports were going to get no money. But they were going to get knowledge. They were going to watch how the process worked. And if the whole program was strong, down the road they knew they would get more. And they were big enough to not stand up and say, wait a minute, if I don't get my piece of the pie, I'm going to fight it. Instead of saying, okay, we're into it. We recognize that we don't have medal potential yet. But maybe if we support it, we can get there.
So you took a fair amount of time to develop that mandate. You had meaningful consultations.
Lots.
People were on side. What were the results in 2010?
Well, we went in wanting to be #1 in medals. We actually got 27 or 28 medals. We came 3rd in total medals. The Germans and Americans beat us. I think Americans got about 35. But we have 14 gold medals. We'd only ever had, I think, 6 or 7 maximum before. The most anybody ever had in a Winter Olympics was, I think, 11. We got 14 gold medals. Absolutely knocked it out of the park. I mean, it was a stunning achievement. And we would probably have had more medals, but we had our teams, coaches, and athletes so focused and so much believing in themselves. Remember, one of the things I said is, one thing we had to attack was mental preparation, a belief that we could succeed. and we had transformed the way our athletes went into the games. They no longer stood on the starting line saying, that guy might have a better coach, or that guy's got better equipment. They believed they had the best of everything, research, coaching, because we had invested in it, and they did have it. And that mental belief, you know, it translated into success. So while we didn't get the most medals, we elevated our medal level very, very high. We got the most golds, captivated Canadians. And there were many athletes who probably could have gotten a bronze or a silver who said, I didn't come here to come second or third, I came here to win, who blew themselves out of a race early because they were pushing so hard. So tremendously successful.
After doing all of that preparation in terms of the developing of the mandate, getting buy-in, and then executing it, and then being very successful, as you look back at that era, that period of time, what was one of the most important qualities that came through or has come through for you in terms of why you were so successful in this?
I would say probably getting the buy-in from a lot of people, listening to a lot of people, and being able to then create a vision for success that everybody understood, that everybody bought into. They understood what their role was. They understood that it was achievable. They would bring resources to the table. And I think that, to me, when we talk about leadership, for example, they overcomplicate what leadership is all about. You know, if you go into business bookstores, there are books and books and books and books on leadership theories. I don't think it's all that complicated. You know good leadership when you see it. Really, to me, there are basically two elements to leadership. One is the ability to articulate a vision that everybody can understand and can buy into. And then the second is to find good people that can execute on that. Get them the resources they want, get obstacles out of the way, get out of the way yourself, let them know how you're going to measure them, give them the credit for success, you take the blame for the failures, and away you go. And so in this case, I think us being able to, the Olympic Committee and then the people that were engaged with the project, being able to demonstrate that vision and share it well and have everybody understand what their role was and what the benefit was at the end of the road was a huge part of making it successful. It was a highly, highly, highly collaborative effort.